You have found the Thinking Mind podcast.
Today I want to spend a few minutes talking about the differences between intelligence and wisdom, to make a clear distinction between them and give some concrete examples as well. Why do I want to talk about this? Intelligence and wisdom are easily conflated, and it's important to be able to spot the differences between them as you move through life. We live in a time, arguably, where we're surrounded by signs of intelligence, as it were, in the form of technology, access to knowledge, debate. And at the same time, there seems to be a dearth of wisdom and perspective. This obviously could be for a number of reasons. I think one likely major reason is the diminishment of religion as a major social institution over the past 100 years or so. Despite the flaws of organized religion, it is classically one of the mechanisms by which people could get access to wisdom en masse. Now, obviously, there are reasons why religion has had its credibility diminished, and I'm not going to get into that here. But I do think there is a baby that has been thrown out with the bathwater. As a result, there's much less societal consensus on where or how to get access to wisdom, or maybe even what wisdom is, how we conceive of it. And I think as a society, we're constantly muddling up intelligence and wisdom. I believe we also live in a time where we're so convinced of our rationality and our logical outlook that, ironically, we're just as much slaves to our ever-changing emotions as we ever have been. Often, there's a strong dissonance between what we think and how we feel, and people have all sorts of conflict as a result, and they try and iron out this conflict, this cognitive dissonance, in a number of unhelpful ways. Wisdom is a lot of things, but one of the things it is an attempt to reconcile our more rational mind and our emotional mind. This is explicitly talked about in dialectical behavior therapy, which spells out the dangers of being both too rational and too emotional. And instead, DBT speaks of this idea of wise mind as the best mental space from which we can make important decisions. And I think this makes sense. You can't spend your life ignoring your emotions, being cold, rational, logical, and neither can you give full credence to your emotions at all times. There's a reason why we have both of those mental processes. So, moving on to the differences between intelligence and wisdom. Suffice to say, they're not the same thing. And this is exemplified in many fictional stories which have characters known as wise idiots. So you think of books like Of Mice and Men, or movies like Forrest Gump, where you have characters who don't possess really what we think of as intelligence, but they have some kind of grasp on something more intangible about the nature of things. They have intuitions about how to navigate the world that more intelligent people may not have. This is similar to the kinds of intuitions you see children having oftentimes. Although intelligence is obviously useful, it's not really a substitute for an ethical or a moral system. In a moral sense, intelligence is neither inherently good or inherently bad. If you look at science as an example, science is I suppose you could call it an intelligent process. It's a process of discovering the nature of the world as it is, in a material sense. But it can be used both for good or bad ethical purposes. You can use nuclear technology to create a nuclear power plant or to create a hydrogen bomb. Same science, essentially, the same principles, but embedded within totally different ethical aims. Not only that, but intelligence and intelligent processes can actually get in the way of wisdom actively. This is especially the case when people go through life and encounter difficult experiences, which might make them bitter or resentful. They can become inclined, either consciously or unconsciously, to use their intelligence for destructive purposes. I'm going to go ahead and use a Star Wars example. In Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker is highly traumatized after the death of his mum. He becomes fixated on this idea of stopping his loved ones from dying, and in so doing, he allows himself to be seduced by the prospect of achieving this control over life and death via the quote-unquote dark side. And ironically, this results in him making a series of catastrophic decisions, and his actions result in him losing his wife and his best friend. Intelligence is more like a tool or a problem-solving machine, but it should be subservient to every individual's moral or ethical system. Intelligence can be used to deceive yourself and others, to rationalize poor decisions and otherwise be defensive. Intelligence can justify self-destructive behavior, both to yourself and to other people. And intelligence can even be used to justify not pursuing what it is that you want. Wisdom, on the other hand, is the courage to wrestle with reality as it is, rather than trying to manipulate your reality to suit whatever your goal is. So in the example of Anakin Skywalker, wisdom would be facing the realities of life and death, that life has an end, and soberly facing up to that reality would have allowed him to make better decisions. Here are some more rapid-fire examples to hammer the point home. Intelligence is winning a game or an argument, rationalizing why you can eat another donut, closing a deal, passing an exam, getting someone into bed, and increasing your revenue. Intelligence is an iPhone, an encyclopedia, or an instruction manual. Wisdom is more like a compass or a map. It's more about finding the right direction, making the right decision at the right time. Sometimes wisdom is doing nothing. It's thinking about the long term and the big picture. Wisdom is listening to someone's counter-argument rather than being obsessed with winning the argument. It's knowing when to end a relationship. It's knowing when a deal isn't worth closing. Wisdom is more about extrapolating the results of your decisions over time. Giving another example, how do you choose a healthy meal? You can see the difference between a healthy meal and an unhealthy meal much more over time than you can in the moment. If you eat a chicken salad or eat a pizza one day, you're not going to notice much of a difference between the two options. But if you eat a chicken salad every day for a year, or a pizza every day for a year, that's when really profound differences start to emerge. Wisdom is knowing that life is not one game, but a series of games. And often your reputation is staked much more on how you play each game, rather than whether you win or lose. So I hope this helps create a clear distinction between wisdom and intelligence. The idea is that it can help you spot the difference between the two as you encounter them in life, and as a result make better decisions. Ultimately, my feeling is that obviously intelligence is great, but it should be embedded within your own personal wisdom or philosophy, which you construct brick by brick over time. What do you think about intelligence versus wisdom? Thanks again to those of you who have emailed with feedback. We really appreciate it. Do be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, and thanks for listening.
You are listening to the Thinking Mind podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd love it if you share it with a friend, or you could give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you fancy it, you can even buy us a coffee to support the team, and the links for that will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening.